The sun was setting behind the Arizona hills, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and pink. The wind carried the scent of dry sage and dust as John Carson, a quiet rancher in his early 40s, rode slowly back to his small ranch. His horse, a sturdy brown Mustang named Dusty, moved steadily along the narrow trail. John had spent the entire day repairing fences and checking on his cattle. He was tired but peaceful. The ranch was his life. He had no family left, just the land, the sky, and the silence of the desert. As he neared the river that marked the edge of his property, he noticed something unusual. 2 young women stood near the water, trying to guide a frightened horse out of the shallow stream. They wore simple buckskin dresses and had long black hair tied with leather cords. Their faces were marked with worry, but their movements were quick and skilled. John had seen Apache people before, but never this close. He stopped his horse a few yards away, not wanting to startle them. "Evening," he said softly. His voice was calm but carried easily in the quiet air. The older of the 2 sisters looked up. Her name was Nita. She was cautious but not afraid. The younger one, Tala, held the horse's reins tightly. The animal was struggling, and its hooves slipped on the wet stones. John dismounted and walked closer, keeping his hands visible. "Need a hand?" he asked. The sisters exchanged a look. Then Nita nodded slightly. Together, they worked to calm the frightened horse. John spoke gently to the animal, using the same tone he used with his cattle. After a few minutes, the horse relaxed and stepped safely onto the riverbank. Tala smiled with relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her English was simple but clear. John nodded. "You're welcome. Storm's coming from the west. You should find shelter soon." Nita studied him for a moment. "We know a place," she said. "But it is far." John looked toward the horizon. Dark clouds were gathering fast. The air had that heavy electric stillness that came before a storm. "There's a cabin up the ridge," he said. "You can stay there for the night. Safer than out here." Nita hesitated. "You trust strangers?" John smiled faintly. "You helped my horse. I helped yours. Seems fair to me." The sisters followed him up the rocky path to an old line cabin, just a small wooden shelter used by ranchers during long rides. Inside it was simple: a cot, a small stove, and a few supplies. John lit a lantern, and its warm light filled the room. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert. Rain began to fall, slow and steady at first, then harder, drumming against the roof. The sisters removed their wet shawls and sat near the small stove. John gave them some jerky and coffee, and they shared a little bread they carried. They didn't talk much at first, but soon curiosity began to break the silence. John learned they were traveling to find their younger brother, who had gone missing near the mining camp 2 weeks ago. They feared he had been taken or lost in the desert. John listened carefully. He had heard rumors of trouble between miners and Apache families. "I know that area," he said. "It's rough country. I can help you look in the morning." Tala's eyes brightened with hope. "You would help us?" he nodded. "No one should have to search alone." As the storm raged outside, the small cabin became a place of unexpected peace. The sisters spoke quietly in their own language at times, and John sat near the doorway listening to the rain and watching the lightning flash across the dark hills. The sound of the storm reminded him of many lonely nights spent out here. But tonight felt different. He wasn't alone, and for reasons he couldn't explain. That comforted him. Later, when the rain softened to a whisper, Tala told him about their home in the valley, how their people were struggling as settlers and soldiers took more land each year. She spoke with both sadness and pride. "We stay because our ancestors are in the earth," she said softly. "If we leave, we lose who we are." John nodded. He understood more than she thought. His own family had once tried to hold on to a small piece of land back east, but the railroad had taken it. He came west to start over, just as many others had. The world was changing fast and not always for the better. The night grew colder, and John added more wood to the stove. Nita sat quietly watching him. "You are a good man," she said after a long pause. "Many would not stop for us." John shook his head. "You just needed help. That's all." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but the world is not kind to my people." He didn't know what to say. The truth was too heavy to put into words. Outside, the rain stopped completely and the air smelled clean and fresh. The firelight flickered across their faces, and for a brief moment, There was a quiet sense of connection between them. 3 people from different worlds, sharing one small space against the endless wilderness. As dawn began to touch the sky with pale light, the storm had passed. The desert looked new again, washed and shining in the early sun. The sisters prepared to leave, thanking John for his kindness. He saddled Dusty and told them he would ride with them part way, to help search for their brother. They smiled, grateful for his company. They rode together across the open land, the sun climbing higher. John pointed out trails and canyons where travelers might get lost. Nita watched the horizon with sharp eyes, scanning for any sign of her brother. Tala rode beside John, sometimes asking him questions about ranch life, sometimes just riding in silence. After a few miles, they reached a dry arroyo that split into 2 paths. Nita looked uncertain. "We go east," she said. "That is where he last went," John nodded. "Then east it is." The trail grew rougher, winding through red rock cliffs. The air was hot now, and the silence felt heavy again. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of anyone. Finally, they stopped to rest near a cluster of mesquite trees. John looked around, noticing faint hoofprints in the sand. Fresh ones. "Someone's been through here recently," he said. Nita came closer, studying the tracks. "Yes, 1 horse. Not Apache." John's instincts told him something was wrong. The prints led toward an old mining road, half buried by dust and time. "We should be careful," he warned. "That road leads to trouble." The sisters nodded, but determination shone in their eyes. They were not turning back. As they followed the trail, a strange unease settled over John. The wind had changed and the desert seemed too quiet. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as if they were being watched. The sun dipped low again, throwing long shadows across the rocks. The day was ending, but their search had only grown more mysterious. Ahead lay the remains of an abandoned mining camp, its wooden shacks leaning under the weight of years. A lone vulture circled above. John stopped his horse and looked at the sisters. "If he came this way," he said slowly, "we'll find some sign." The sisters nodded, their faces set with determination and fear. The evening wind whispered through the empty camp as they rode forward, not knowing that this place would soon hold answers and danger that would change all their lives forever. The evening sun faded behind the red cliffs as John and the 2 Apache sisters, Nita and Tala, reached the silent mining camp. The wind whistled through broken windows and old wooden signs creaked softly. The place looked deserted, yet there were traces of recent movement. A half-burned campfire, a tin cup left on a barrel, and footprints in the dirt. Dust swirled around them, and even the horses seemed uneasy. John dismounted first and looked around carefully. "Someone's been here not long ago," he said quietly. The sisters followed him, their eyes sharp and alert. They moved with quiet steps as if the land itself could hear them. Nita picked up a small leather pouch lying near the fire pit. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a beaded bracelet, one she had made for her brother. "It's his," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes filled with hope. John felt a mix of relief and worry. "Then he was here," he said. "We're close." They searched through the abandoned shacks, calling the brother's name softly so as not to draw unwanted attention. The camp was eerie. Tools scattered on the ground, rusted carts, and the faint smell of old smoke. Suddenly, Tala stopped and pointed to the far end of the camp. "Look," she said. "There." At the edge of the camp stood an old storage shed, its door hanging crookedly. From inside came a faint noise, like someone coughing. John motioned for the sisters to stay back. He moved closer, his hand near the handle of his knife, just in case. Slowly he pushed the door open. Inside, lying on a pile of old sacks, was a young Apache boy. His face was pale, his arm bandaged with a dirty cloth. When he saw John, he tried to sit up, but weakness pulled him back down. "Nita," he whispered. The sisters rushed forward, calling his name, Kai. They knelt beside him, tears in their eyes. Nita held his hand while Tala unwrapped his bandage carefully. The wound looked bad but not fresh. He had clearly been hurt days ago and left behind. John found a small water barrel nearby and brought it to them. "Drink slowly," he said to the boy. "You're safe now." Kai took a sip and smiled weakly. "They left me," he said, his voice rough. "The miners. They thought I was stealing. They hit me and took my horse." Nita clenched her fists, anger flashing across her face. "They hurt you for nothing." John looked at the boy's injuries and nodded grimly. "We'll get you out of here." The storm cleared the river so we can ride back before dark. But as they prepared to leave, the sound of horses echoed from beyond the ridge. The sisters froze. John stepped outside the shed, scanning the trail. A group of 3 riders appeared, their silhouettes sharp against the glowing sunset. Miners, rough men with rifles slung across their saddles. John's heart tightened. He knew men like them, quick to anger, slow to listen. He whispered to Nita, "Stay inside with Kai. Don't move until I say." He walked forward calmly, hands open to show he carried no weapon. The miners slowed their horses, eyeing him suspiciously. The man in front, with a thick beard and scar across his cheek, spoke first. "What are you doing here, rancher?" "Just passing through," John said evenly. "Found an injured boy. He's Apache. You know anything about that?" The man laughed harshly. "Maybe. Kid shouldn't have been snooping around the camp. We taught him a lesson." John's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "He's just a boy. He needs a doctor." The man spat on the ground. "Not my problem. And you'd better move along before you make it yours." John knew he couldn't fight 3 armed men, not with the sisters and Kai depending on him. He needed a plan. "All right," he said slowly. "We'll be on our way." He turned as if to leave, but his eyes met Nita's through a crack in the door. She understood wait, then run when he gave the signal. The miners watched him suspiciously. "Where's your horse?" one of them asked. John smiled faintly. "Over by the well," he said, and then suddenly slapped the nearest horse's flank. The startled animal reared, knocking its rider off balance. In the confusion, John ran toward the shed. "Go now!" he shouted. Nita and Tala lifted Kai carefully onto Dusty, John's strong Mustang. The sisters climbed up behind him while John grabbed the reins. Bullets cracked through the air, echoing off the rocks. Dust flew up around them as they galloped out of the camp, hearts pounding. The chase through the desert was fierce. The miners followed, shouting angrily. John rode hard, guiding the horse along the narrow river path he knew well. The sky had turned deep purple, stars beginning to appear. The desert wind whipped past them, carrying the smell of sage and rain. "Hold on tight," John yelled over the sound of hooves. Nita clutched her brother while Tala held on behind her, whispering prayers in Apache. The riders were close behind, their torches flickering like angry fireflies in the dark. John led them through a rocky pass where the trail split around a tall cliff. "We can lose them here," he said. He pointed to a narrow gap between 2 boulders. "Go that way. I'll draw them off." Nita shook her head. "No, you'll be killed." He smiled faintly. "Not if I ride fast. Go. Take him home." Before she could argue, John turned Dusty sharply and rode toward the opposite path, firing his rifle once in the air to get the miners' attention. The loud echo drew them after him. As the sound of hooves faded in the distance, the sisters guided Kai through the narrow gap toward safety. The night was cold and silent again. They found shelter beneath a low ridge where they waited, hearts heavy. Hours passed before the first light of dawn touched the sky. Tala watched the horizon, hoping to see John's horse returning. But only the wind moved through the desert. Days later, Nita and Tala brought Kai back to their people in the valley. He recovered slowly, his wound healing under their mother's care. The tribe welcomed them home, but sadness lingered in their hearts. No one had seen John since that night. His horse was later found wandering near the canyon, saddle torn, reins broken, but there was no sign of the rancher. Some said he had been killed by the miners. Others believed he had fallen into one of the old mining shafts. But Nita refused to believe he was gone. Sometimes, when the evening sun painted the desert red and gold, she would ride to the ridge above the river and look toward the horizon. "He kept his promise," she would say quietly. "He helped us find my brother. The desert keeps the rest." Years passed, and the story of the rancher who never returned became part of local legend. Travelers spoke of a lone rider seen at dusk, moving silently across the plains. Some said it was his spirit still watching over the land he loved. Others believed he had simply chosen to disappear, leaving behind the noise and cruelty of men for the peace of the wilderness. For the Apache people, his name was remembered not as an outsider but as a friend who had stood beside them when others would not. The sisters often told their children about that stormy night, the stranger who offered kindness without asking anything in return, who faced danger with quiet courage. And so in the wide and endless desert, where the wind still whispered through the canyons and the stars shone like old memories, The story of John Carson lived on. It was a tale not just of loss but of honor, bravery, and the unspoken bond between those who meet by chance and change each other's lives forever.